Good evening, everybody. Diana Eck, Dorothy Austin, Dr. Mukherjee, Cyrus Gazdar, Asha Sheth, trustees of the Vasant Sheth Foundation, and our dearest friends who come year after year and support us in this wonderful way. It gives me the greatest honor to have as our 18th speaker this year, the incredible Diana Eck. In the past few days, Aurobind and I have had the pleasure of getting to know her a little. Her formidable scholarship, her vital energy, her deep understanding and love of India, and her enormous humility has made it so easy for all of us to interact with this great scholar. Before I ask Cyrus Gazdar, known to everybody in this hall, indeed to Bombay, to introduce Diana Eck, may I ask everyone to switch off their cell phones. A couple of chairs will be coming in the next 10 or 15 minutes, so please bear with us till that time. May I also request you to stay till the end when we have a short presentation ceremony after Diana Eck speaks, and then if there's time, we might even have questions. At our presentation ceremony, Mrs. Sheth will have a few words, and we will invite Cyrus Gazdar and Diana Eck both up on the podium at the end. So please bear with us and stay till the end. Thank you very much. Cyrus?
Professor Diana Eck, Dorothy, Asha Sheth, Ketki Sheth, ladies and gentlemen. Shall we imagine for a moment that we've joined a group of pilgrims high up in the Himalayas near Gangotri, in the temple of Ganga Mata, overlooking the icy waters of the Ganga. The sun is setting, and the pujari commences the evening aarti. First, turning away from the image of Ganga Mata towards the river, because after all, she, the Ganga, is really the goddess and the temple. Finally, with river water cupped in his hands, he turns to distribute this to his devotees, among whom is a young American lady, and he begins to chant a hymn to the Ganga, which some of you, Jerry Rao, will recognize. Samruddham Saubhagyam Sakala Vasudhaya Kim Apitan. O Mother Ganga, may your water, abundant blessing of the world, treasure of Lord Shiva, the playful Lord of the world, essence of the scriptures and embodied goodness of the gods, may your water, sublime wine of immortality, soothe our troubled souls. Professor Diana Eck's beautiful translation of these lines from the first verses of the 16th century poet Jagannath, which you remember now as Ganga Lahari, make one wonder what it was that brought this young American scholar, born in a secluded mountain valley in Montana, USA, to spend a large part of her life exploring and studying pilgrimage sites across the length and breadth of India. Diana Eck confesses that she is a lifelong Christian Methodist, but has probably prayed in more Hindu temples than any other living Methodist. Her birthplace in Montana, coincidentally, or was it something more divinely engineered, was situated in a beautiful valley close to the Sangam of three rivers. This Triveni collectively are the source of the river Missouri, which in turn is a major tributary of the Mississippi. Like so many of her young peer group in college in the mid-60s, Diana was troubled by America's involvement in the Vietnam War. Her friends were being drafted into the war and killed, and she became increasingly aware that the involvement of her country in conflicts so far away seemed to outstrip its knowledge of the cultures of those countries. driven by the need to know more about the traditions of Asia, she opted to spend her junior college year in Varanasi. Perhaps as she walked through the streets of Benares for the first time, Mark Twain's comment about the city must have resonated with her. He had quipped, "Benares is older than history, older than tradition, older even than legend, and it looks twice as old as all of those put together." But soon, she says, it was in Varanasi that she found her life's calling. The challenge of studying and trying to understand the religious faiths of the world, other faiths, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Jain, traditions that she did not share, but she was challenged to understand. After graduating in the US, she did a postgrad degree at Banaras Hindu University, and over the succeeding years, Diana began to follow, perhaps unwittingly, the footsteps of many explorer pilgrims who from the earliest times traversed the country, recording their visits to the important places of their time, for the most part, places of pilgrimage and worship. Alexander, who arrived in Takshashila, not far from the Indus in 326 BC, learned from holy men over there of a vast land to the east and the south, with named places of pilgrimage. Fahien was in Sarnath in the 5th century. Huansang was all over the country in the 7th, leaving behind, we think, an inscription in Chinese in a cave right here at Kaneri. And then, of course, Shankara in the 9th century. All of them did what the 4 Pandava brothers did upon the coronation of Yudhishthir. They set off in all 4 directions. Bhima to the east, Arjuna to the north, Sahadev to the south, and Nakul to the west. What Diana came to realize as she studied this landscape of tirthas, rivers, forests, hilltop shrines, all imbued with an aura of holiness, often conveniently grouped as 7 sacred rivers, 12 Jyotirlingas, 51 Shakti Pithas, and so on, was that her beloved Benares was not an isolated sacred city, but it formed part of a great interlinked network of places for which the points of the compass, the Char Dhams, had already been firmly put down. In fact, earlier Shankaracharya's disciples had established mutts at Jyotirmaya in the north, Puri in the east, Dwarka in the west, Sringeri in the south. Piecing this landscape together, Diana observed that well before India was considered a country in the contemporary terms of a national polity, there was an idea of Bharata. It already existed in both a geographic and a mythological sense, the boundaries of which extended across the subcontinent from the high Himalayas to the meeting of the 3 seas at the southern tip of India. In fact, Iravati Karve famously described Maharashtra as the land where people go to Pandharpur for pilgrimage. Saurashtra could equally be described in terms of pilgrimages to the peaks of Girnar. For many, Kerala is known for the temple of Lord Ayyappa at Shabarimala, with the Pampa river flowing through this landscape as a sacred river through that local universe. So Diana wrote 3 key books on India: Banaras City of Light in 83, Darshan in 98, and India Sacred Geography, of which I see many copies here today, in 2012. And these books weave a literary tapestry which combines seamlessly various strands of locative geography, the mythological stories around each site, and the spiritual awakening that devotees feel. She says every place has a story, and every story has a place. Her shortest book, Darshan, brings to mind a delightful anecdote which I heard in a conversation between her and Devdutt Patnaik, who, as you know, is an entertaining raconteur of mythology. Devdutt says as he entered the deep and dark corridors of the great Vishnu temple at Tiruvananthapuram, he finally reaches the sanctum. With his eyes barely adjusted to the deepening darkness, a small door is opened. Eagerly awaiting to take darshan of the great God, all he can see is the hand of the deity. He's moved on with the press of the crowds, and a second small door is open. And now all that Devdutt can see is the navel of the great Vishnu lying on the serpent Sesha. And then a third door is opened, again only for a brief moment, and he catches a glimpse of the feet. He catches a glimpse of the feet of Vishnu Seshashayi. Devdutt complains to the pujari, "Why do I not have more time to see my God?" He receives a short answer, "You can't see infinity at a glance." Diana refers to this darshan, this act of holy seeing, the half-second glimpse of Lord Venkateshwara after your 4-hour wait, where even a mere glimpse of the deity can lead to deep and lasting introspection. Now, surprisingly, for her rich and erudite contributions to scholarship in India, Diana is more publicly recognized in her own country for her work on what is now known as the Pluralism Project. It was the enactment of the US immigration laws of 1965, the year when Diana was first in Banaras, that opened the doors of the US to a large number of immigrants. And indeed, a very large number came from India, doctors, engineers, professionals. And Diana observed a rapidly changing religious landscape all around her in the United States, with temples, mosques, gurudwaras sprouting out of the landscape. By then she was a professor at Harvard, and she found her own world changing. She began to notice that her neighbors were no longer white Christian Americans, but belonged to different faiths from all over the world. Her 3 foster children were Kosovar Muslims. And she recalls the inauguration of a temple in Boston where lotas of Ganga Jal and water from the Mississippi River were commingled and poured during the Abhishek. This new pluralism in American society, she felt, demanded new responses on how to live in a multilingual, multi-faith society, how to engage with neighbors across the street and across the world. She quotes the odd result of a local survey that showed 97% of the people believed that Muslims were very devout. But 59% of the people didn't know what they believed in, and 39% had pretty strong prejudices against them. You can substitute India for the US, and you can substitute other communities, and regrettably, we might come to the same conclusion. So of great interest to us really is the critical distinction that Diana observes between diversity, which is a fact of life, and pluralism, which is what we make of that diversity. Tolerance of diversity, a buzzword in India today, is for Diana to sin a foundation for life. She urges that we need to know more about each other, not just tolerate each other, but that means holding our deepest differences not in isolation, but in relation to one another. And so from these studies emerged a much acclaimed work, which we don't see much of in India. It's called A New Religious America, how a Christian country has become the world's most religiously diverse nation. For Diana, the language of pluralism is not about dogmas, it's about relationships. Now, someone said there are 30 million gods in India, but I have 5 minutes left. So I must now turn to the concluding part of my introduction, which I hope will give a third dimension to what Diana may wish to talk about today. And so once again, let me quote you a little anecdote, again from my friend Devdutt, which will lead us into this. Once again, it seems to be always where he is, he was deep in the bowels of a dark temple approaching the sanctum. This time it was the temple of Jagannath at Puri. His feet crunched over fragments of camphor and dead flowers till he finally discerned through the haze of half-burnt oil the wide, white-painted eyes of Lord Jagannath himself. To his horror, he saw a large cockroach climbing up the face of the god, and he screamed in anguish at the pujari. But the priest's indifferent response was, "Kya Bhagwan tere hi liye hai? Is God only for you or what?" So is it this attitude of devotion that blinds us to the appalling degradation of our sacred rivers. I quote Diana, "As the Ganga draws India's millions to it, it draws with them their prayers, their ills, and their pollution. The health and vibrancy of the Ganga and other rivers is now both a theological and an ecological issue." As far back as the 3rd century BC, Ashoka, in one of his edicts enunciating his conservation dharma, prohibited the slaughter of various species, including the Ganga puputaka, which was very likely the Ganges river dolphin. Let us also remember that Ganga herself rides a gharial, a species of gangetic crocodile. Our rivers are living entities with their flow and their flood, their feed and their seed. They are worshipped for what they give and for what they take away. But today, they represent one of our country's largest ecological tragedies. Choked with garbage, poisoned by sewage and toxic industrial effluent, depleted by water drawn from municipalities and factories, and above all, interrupted by dams. This is the state of the gigantic river basin that feeds over 500 million people, almost 10% of the world's population. So, it should be gratifying that the central government's program to clean the Ganga has as its slogan, Nirmal Dhara, Aviral Dhara, unpolluted flow, uninterrupted flow. But where are we today? 7 IITs 20 months ago presented to government a 37-volume report, and they urged that the flow of water in the main river channel needs to be increased 2.5 times. The government's response was to shelve the report, and it sanctioned another 199 power projects, small and large, damming the river upstream and over and above the 45 hydro projects that already punctuate the upper courses of the Ganga. All dams need tunnels. All tunnels damage the brittle geology of the Himalayas and endanger human life. 2,000 were killed in 1991 in the Uttarakhand earthquake when they fell into the shallow foundations of a tunnel below. 5,700 people died in the flash floods just 2 years ago, all attributable to human interference with the environment. Now, lest we think that this government's preoccupation with the Ganga is something pioneering, it's worth recalling that Rajiv Gandhi launched the Ganga Control Authority in 1985, enlisting the support of the chief ministers of UP, Bihar, and West Bengal. A poignant case is the Bikramshil Gangetic Dolphin Sanctuary. It was established in 91 to protect the highly endangered Ganges River dolphin in just a 60-kilometer stretch of the river near Bhagalpur. The Fisheries Department refused to recognize the sanctuary and decided to support fishermen who compete with the dolphin. The Forest Department refused to recognize fishing rights because it was a sanctuary. And so between them, they managed neither the fisheries nor protected the dolphin. Since then, we've had a 135-kilometer eco-sensitive zone declared between Gaumukh and Uttarkashi. And now finally, in 2010, we have a grand national river basin authority stretching from Gaumukh in the Himalayas to the Ganga Sagar in Bengal, 5 chief ministers, 50 cities, 1,650 gram panchayats. This grand river basin authority has not met once. Now, one question we need to ask Professor Diana Eck, or let me put it this way, one question you should never ask Professor Diana Eck when she is in India is, where are you? Because the chances are she's on the Ganga. And indeed, with eyes fresh from a trip to the Ganga, she's just completed her 3rd such river journey, boating upstream from Calcutta for 12 days till the sand banks and the meager flow of water, where oh where is the Aviral Dhara, stopped her journey. So may I now request Professor Diana Eck to talk to us about India's sacred rivers, their past, their present, and some thoughts about their future.
Welcome. What a wonderful introduction. I feel so honored to have been read so carefully and introduced so warmly. Cyrus, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here in Mumbai and at this great museum and to deliver, an honor to deliver, the Vasant Sheth lecture. Dorothy and I have been received so warmly by Vasant Sheth's family, by Asha, Ketaki, and Aurobindo, and I extend our deepest thanks and pranams to them, and to Nisreen Paketwala, who has been so helpful in all our arrangements, and I have never been treated to such an introduction as that of Cyrus Gudzer. Thank you. I came from the western part of the United States, as Cyrus said. I've made my home in Cambridge for about 40 years now, but the rivers of Montana and the Pacific Northwest were very much part of the landscape of my life. In my valley, there was that important sangam of rivers named for American presidents, the Gallatin, the Jefferson, the Madison rivers, all swift-flowing, cold rivers from the Rocky Mountains that joined to form the Missouri, and in the next valley, the Yellowstone River, and that became a tributary of the Missouri as well. And as Cyrus said, when that first Hindu temple was consecrated, the first time I'd ever been to a Kumbha Abhishekam in the United States, in 1992, the waters of America's rivers mingled with the waters of the Ganga and were poured over the Gopuram and the towers and the murtis. And so my own interest in this subject has many, many sources. I've long been a student of India's pilgrimage traditions, looking historically and today to the energy of pilgrim traffic that has long brought Hindus to a multitude of places called tirthas, sacred crossings, many of them on the banks of rivers, the confluence of rivers, and seen more profoundly as spiritual crossings where we can somehow ford this river of earthly life to the expansive horizon of the far shore. Pilgrims travel into the Himalayas, on foot still, to some of the tirthas, to the great shrines and sources of the rivers, to Gangotri and Yamunotri, Kedarnath and Badrinath. And then at the far end of India, from these Himalayan tirthas, is Kanyakumari, where the waters of 3 oceans crash upon the rocks. There, in a protected bathing place, standing waist deep in water, all the waters of India are said to join in a great sangam called the Triveni, after that famous Triveni in Allahabad and Prayag, the triple braid of rivers, the Ganga, Yamuna, and Sarasvati, that come together on that broad floodplain. But here at Kanyakumari is another kind of Triveni, where 3 oceans meet, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Bay of Bengal. And standing at that Triveni, one might consider oneself to be bathing in all the waters of India that have emerged into these oceans. And in the early morning, waist deep in the ocean waters, they make their sankalpa, holding waters in their cupped hands as the priest intones, "Here I bathe in the Triveni, in the ocean at Kanyakumari." And in these waters, perhaps, the pilgrims also imaginatively feel the gathered waters of the rivers of India, perhaps especially the 7 sacred rivers, the Sindhu, Ganga, Yamuna, that pour from the plains pour from the Himalayas into the plains, the Narmada flowing from Amarkantaka in the east and westward toward the Arabian Sea, the Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, and others that flow from the Western Ghats to the Bay of Bengal. These are the waters of the 7 sacred rivers of India, invoked actually in sacred waters everywhere, from Mumbai to Boston. So I've often wondered, is there any other place on earth where the names of its great rivers are spoken as a prayer, indeed invoked as a prayer, as goddesses? Over the course of my work in India's sacred geography, I've traveled to the source of many of these great rivers. Each of the rivers has its own set of issues in the fast-paced world of today: the expanding population, the difficulties of managing rivers. Closest to Kanyakumari is the source of the Kaveri at Talai-Kaveri in Kurd country, where a bathing pool is filled with the waters of the source. Where else are the headwaters of rivers honored with shrines and bathing places, visited not just by tourists, but by pilgrims? And as we think about the course of the Kaveri today as it streams across Karnataka and into Tamil Nadu, embracing the great island shrine of Sri Rangam, we glimpse some of the tensions and controversies that attend these waters as they flow down the hills into the plains where Karnataka and Tamil Nadu are fiercely locked in competition that has gone on for, well, frankly, well over a century, until a tribunal attempted to settle the matter with little effect as the dispute continued until the apportionment and water release was awarded by the Supreme Court of India. And then the headwaters of the Narmada in the Maikala Hills of eastern India at Amarakantaka, a place where the pattern of divine descent of waters from heaven to earth is repeated, the Narmada said to flow from the very body of Shiva in these hills in Madhya Pradesh, a river that is circumambulated even today by the most hardy and the most elderly of pilgrims as well, 1,600 miles, 2,600 kilometers, from source to sea and back along the other bank. Their Narmada parikrama may well take what remains of the rest of their lives. Others than these two women may do a section of the river parikrama every summer or when vacation time permits. And today, even a 14-day parikrama package is organized, taking in the high spots of the river. And among those high spots, the great Jyotirlinga of Omkareshwara, sitting on an island in the middle of the Narmada, so far unaffected by the Omkareshwara Dam, part of that huge controversial Narmada River project. Just as the Sardar Sarovar downstream, the major controversy here is the farm and the tribal lands that are flooded, leaving farmers of nearby Khandwa to stage a Jal Satyagraha, standing in the water as it rose about them, day after day after day, until at last, in May, after 32 days, with water waist deep around them, the authorities in Madhya Pradesh agreed to lower the water level in the Omkareshwara Dam. But the decades of controversy surrounding the huge Narmada Dam projects are surely not over. And then the Godavari, its source high above the Triambaka Jyotirlinga in Maharashtra, where pilgrims climb a steep bluff to the top of a 5-peaked mountain called Brahmagiri, the whole mountain really called Shiva Swarupa, Shiva himself. And in this place, the 5 Oh, hi. Good. Are we hearing again in the back? Thank you. Thank you very much. And from Brahmagiri, this source flows 1,500 kilometers to the sea as Dakshina Ganga into the Bay of Bengal. And as pilgrims climb this mountain, they head for a small shrine that actually has the source of the Ganga the Dakshina Ganga, inscribed in it in a long ripple of rock that is said to be Shiva's own hair, where the Dakshina Ganga fell from heaven to earth in this place. And of course, the Godavari, within a few miles of its source, comes into a series of tanks near Triambaka, and then in Nasik himself, a place where the most recent Kumbh Mela took place this past summer. And yet the entire flow of the Narmada has more dams and barrages than any other river in India, including the new Palanaruam project that is part of a federal scheme, a national scheme to link the rivers. And Sri Ram Sagar is one of these many dams along the river. In 2015, the water surplus of the Godavari has been planned to be linked to the Krishna River by commissioning the Polavaram project that is part of an envisioned national river linking project, the planning of which is to be completed this year, and opposition to which is significant for all sorts of environmental reasons. It is seen to be a very risky thing to start engineering the linking of rivers one to another in such an intricate way. There's no question that what I bring to you is a simple one. To what extent, then, do the humanities and the consideration of the religious life of the great diversity of peoples who use these rivers in a different way, to what extent are they involved at all in the planning and policies that have been proposed for the rivers, in the dams, the barrages, the linking of rivers? To what extent are policies and planning interested at all in the cultural role of rivers in India? There's no river in India that is without its controversies, whether it's the ownership of waters, the linking damming, the attempting to build barrages to tame and redirect waters. And so too it is with the river I know best, the longest, the Ganga, that in a sense is the archetype of sacred waters elsewhere. Here in Varanasi, where the Ghats stretch out for 7 kilometers along the river, a powerful ancient city that has for centuries experienced the annual rise and fall of the Ganga and the crush of pilgrims and daily worshipers who come to these Ghats. Though clearly its tributaries are many, Gangotri is called the source of the Ganga, though its higher source, of course, is Gomukh, high in a glacial field. But here in a narrow valley, the river Ganga has its strong liquid fingers running through a channel of solid rock. The whitish rock has been smoothed and sculpted, shaped and slotted by the rush of water. And at the place called Gauri Kund, it rushes in powerful torrents through the silk-smooth channels of a high cliff, its cataracts throwing up a cloud of spray into the pool below. As early as the Rig Veda, the waters stored in the vault of heaven are often identified with Soma, the nectar of the gods and the strengthening elixir of immortality. In defeating Vritra, who coiled about the mountain waters, Indra set free these divine waters for the nourishment of the earth. And the seers of the Rig Veda praise these life-giving waters in the famous river hymns. Forth from the midst of the flood they flow, purifying, never sleeping. Their leader, the sea, Indra, the thunderer, the bull, dug out their channels. Here, may these goddess waters bless me. Waters which flow from heaven, which spring from the dug earth, or which meander freely, all of which bright and pure head for the ocean. Here, may these goddess waters bless me. The waters are also homologized to cows, as if Indra had opened the cow pen and set free the cows rushing out upon the plains, their udders filled with milk. And the Prithvi Sukta of the Atharva Veda puts it this way: in her, in the earth, streams distribute themselves in all directions, flowing uniformly without pause or interruption. This land of plenteous streams, may she sprinkle her radiant luster over us. The sanctity of the Ganga, as one of those mother rivers of the Rig Veda, comes with more than 3,000 years of history, if we could call it that. The river enters into popular faith as the river of heaven, flowing from Vishnu's foot across the sky as the Milky Way, or perhaps the Andromeda galaxy. The story of her descent is well known. Implored by the tapas of Bhagirath to come to the earth from heaven to raise the ashes of his ancestor Sagara's sons, burned by the flash of the ascetic's third eye. They could only be restored to life by the Ganga. And so she was implored to come to earth. And the prayers and the penance began. And when she had agreed to fall to earth, Shiva then was implored to catch the Ganga in his hair to cushion her torrential fall. Thus she fell to earth, was trapped in the coils of Shiva's ascetic hair, and then, as we know, Bhagirath released the Ganga from Shiva's hair, and she continued to flow, continues perhaps to flow even today, through his locks, over his body, down the mountain terrain, and out upon the plains of India. A story well known to every Hindu. Now, there is a temple at Gangotri, to be sure, and indeed her murti is honored there, as it is in many, many temples up and down the Ganga. There she is, crowned on her makara, clothed, standing wholly beneficent. No weapons here, only the lotus, the water pot, the emblems and gestures of auspiciousness. But at Gangotri and elsewhere along the course of Ganga, the true murti is the Ganga herself, the river as goddess. And when the priests emerge from the temple with the lamp of arati at Gangotri or elsewhere, they face the river for the offering. Indeed, all along the river, arati is offered to the liquid Shakti, the liquid form of the goddess, Ganga herself. At Haridwar, where Ganga enters the plains of India, the nightly arati or lamp offering to Ganga is a central attraction. And while there are dozens of small shrines at the water's edge, each decorated with an image of Ganga, the goddess Ganga, the real murti, is the river. And so too in Varanasi, on the plains, where a regiment of a dozen priests stands by the water's edge every night to honor the Ganga, lifting these tall, multi-wicked oil lamps into the night sky, dipping them toward the river in perfect synchronized motion. And with all of the honor offerings, the camphor, the incense, the fans, offerings to the water by those who know how critical these waters are. And offerings sponsored, and this only is really of the last 30 years, by Ganga Seva Nidhi, whose slogan on this is saving the Ganga, the source of our life. Water resources, of course, are critical, not only for India, but indeed for the entire world. India has 4% of the world's water resources and more than 17% of the world's population. In water quality, it ranks 122nd. In water per capita, 123rd. And human waste and industrial pollution, an enormous load of pollution, streams from place to place to choke the life out of some of the great rivers, including the Ganga. Flowing across the plains past industrial cities like Kanpur, the river accumulates an ever-increasing burden of untreated chemicals and pesticides. Not only the pollution, but then all the other major issues that beset rivers, balancing the need for dams and hydroelectric power, the need to create canals for irrigation, the project of linking rivers, balancing that somehow with the human and cultural and religious needs of a country that has used the rivers as its theater of life. This month I had the opportunity to travel again for 10 days along the river from Kolkata, up the Hooghly, through the Farakka barrage, into the main channel of the Ganga, as far as Sultanganj, as far as Munger in Bihar. Of all the rivers that stream toward their oceans, Ganga is really the archetypal river, and with millennia of associations, the hymns, etc., and the one whose drainage area across North India supports almost a tenth of the world's population. We see the way in which its monsoon floods bring millions of tons of alluvial soil from the Himalayas to the plains, creating seasonal rice fields rich with the minerals of the Himalayan range, that soft mountain range that is continually eaten away, bringing this silt and alluvial soil in monsoon season to create the richest farming land, seasonal farming land, before it is again submerged. Traveling through what I would call the backyard of India, one could see firsthand both the instability and the fertility of the land. And the main channel of the Ganga, whatever that is unpredictable, creating islands and submerging others as she swings toward the sea, with vast fields opened by the floods and then farmed for the short season, then flooded again. The Ganga flows through major cities and towns, island shrines, hillside shrines like Bateshwar here, on a long course toward Farakka, and then splitting into the Padma and the Hooghly. And many of the village communities on the banks are as seasonal as the river herself. There are 20 major towns, 29 major towns, hundreds of smaller towns and villages, more than 600 million people in the area of North India and Bangladesh watered by the Ganga and its tributaries. The river is also a transportation lifeline with very few bridges and country boats like these, the largest vessels on the river, with goods and passengers that ply the river from bank to bank. Crossing to the far shore is a matter for these ferries, country boats, catamarans in a sense, that ply the river from shore to shore. And commerce and river traffic is a constant as a lifeline of agriculture, bamboo landings like these with goods transported from one side of the river to another. And the life of millions of people in cities and towns is a life that depends upon the river on a daily basis. In the ceaseless flow of life along the banks, morning to night, birth to death, this is where the laundry is done, where the daily round goes on. And in death as well, with cremation grounds large and small. So the river is not an extra. It's not simply a site for a pleasant outing, for a picnic of an afternoon, but an integral and vital theater of regular daily life from birth to death. And of course, religious life. From daily rituals of snan to cremation rites, the river is the ritual theater of India's Hindu life. It's to the banks of rivers that Hindus repair daily to bathe and offer prayers. Granted, there are innumerable temples and wayside shrines, but the rivers are the great tirthas, moving and watering the land and the soul with blessings. India's rivers are understood by Hindus to be sacred, whether they're the Ganga or the local river, are used in ways that are more ritually intensive than in any other nation on earth. So the diminishment of rivers, with rivers receding from their ghats and the enormous burden of pollution they carry, has an escalating impact simply because Hindus, as diverse as they are, universally use rivers and freshwater tanks for ritual bathing, and certainly in the context of pilgrimage. On great bathing days, the rivers draw not only millions of people, but also their ills and their prayers and the offerings that they leave in the waters. The Ganga has been dammed and distributed in canals. It's been the recipient of human and industrial waste. And even as governments and foundations tackle these problems, the siting of dams, the pollution of rivers, the enormous spiritual pull of the waters continues to draw pilgrims by the millions, each and every day. So the health and vibrancy of Ganga and India's rivers is both a religious and an environmental issue. And the issues of pollution can't be addressed without the best efforts of both discourses. Jawaharlal Nehru spoke of dams that were to be built along the major rivers of India as its modern temples, India's modern temples, those massive human constructions that would bring prosperity. But I would propose that in another sense, the rivers of India are its temples, its cathedrals. More than any other grand temple built with the patronage of kings, the fast-flowing Ganga and its sister rivers are the sacred places. And the awareness of the sustenance of rivers is very early. It is part of the Puranic lore of the Mahabharata, early on, setting forth an imaginative view of the rivers of India, understood to flow from this or that mountain range, south, north, east, central, all of them described rather particularly in a geographical literature that is extraordinary for its time. From the places they rise in the mountains all the way to the sea, these river waters are the site of bathing. Even in the cold of the mountains, the source of the Mandakini, for example, at Kedarnath, pilgrims will bathe in these ice-cold water rivulets that form the uppermost tributaries of the Mandakini. And after bathing in the frigid waters, entering into the temple of Kedareshwara, one of the Jyotirlingas, from May to October, a temple that is open, and from October to May, a lamp that is left to burn through the winter, and always said to be burning still when the temple is opened once again in the spring. But even in this high mountain fastness, accessible even today only by foot or perhaps by helicopter, all is not well, and the Chorabari Glacier is melting behind it, retreating up the mountain, and the global warming that comes with this has contributed to massive landslides. Between 2004 and 2007, the snout of the glacier retreated some 90 feet and is now being studied very carefully by glaciologists. This means increasing instability with the rains. It meant landslides and short-term flooding and long-term effects on water supply, since the river that emerges from this glacier is one of the major tributaries of the Ganga. And here in 2013, the catastrophic landslide at Kedarnath. As the rivers wind their way through the mountains, of course, Sangam takes on an important meaning. There are confluences, sangams, where the headwater tributaries of the Ganga meet in the Himalayan highlands. At Rudraprayag, for example, you can see the blue-green waters of the Mandakini, which rises at Kedarnath, join with the whitish mica-laden waters of the Alaknanda that flows from Badrinath. And there at Rudraprayag, at the Sangam, accessible only by that steep staircase descending into the waters from the village above, one would have to hang on to a chain in order to bathe in that Sangam. And eventually, at the next Sangam, at Devprayag, the river is called Ganga. Of course, the great Sangam is in the plains of North India at Prayag, at Allahabad. This great confluence of Ganga and Yamuna has been praised as a holy place for over 2,000 years. And here too, one can see the blue waters of the Yamuna and the white mica-laden waters of the Ganga flowing down from the north and joining at the Sangam, along with the mythical, said to be underground river of the Saraswati. And here, as the floodwaters recede, we can see the bare outlines of the streets, some from the yearly Magh Mela. This is what the floodwaters of that Sangam look in high flood. illustrating the enormous power and flow of the river, where the monsoon is a vast, muddy river. And then, as the waters recede, the creation of this virtual city on the floodplain for the Kumbh Mela. And this sort of Google Earth space shot of the Kumbh Mela city, of Kumbh Nagar, gives us a sense of the enormous effort made to create a city for 7 million people on a floodplain, for Magh Mela virtually every year, for the Kumbh Mela every 12 years, an incredible planning and expertise that's required. It's not even until October of the year before that one could anticipate the course of the river and the buildable area for the Kumbh Nagar, which began then in January of 2013. The pontoon bridges that are constructed to cross the rivers, 18 of them, the huge tent city, private tents, development of private sites, of public sites, of ashrams and encampments of gurus. These mostly set up in the few weeks before the Makar Sankranti and the first big bathing day. A tent city literally for about 7 million people, even though on the large bathing days the city accommodates some 20 million. And there is all of the festival of a Mela, these pavilions that are along the great wide streets of the Kumbh city, the trusts that glitter by night and that include as pavilions of the acharyas and of the Leela groups, Leelas on a daily basis, the Ram Leela here with his Ram and his brother Lakshman holding forth, and all of the encampments of the sadhus, the akaras, that are the Kumbh's sort of central ritual figures and whose presence attracts Hindus for darshan. The number, the sheer size of the Kumbh Mela is spectacular. And thanks to people like the district commissioner, Devesh Chaturvedi, who was here on this stage yesterday, teams from national, state, and municipal government managed to pull this off in a miraculous fashion. And Harvard students actually studied it 2 years ago, students from engineering and public health, etc. But the reason for the Kumbh Mela in Prayag in 2013, the reason that 20 million people bathed in the confluence on the great Shahi Snan days, the reason they came to the Sangam was to bathe in the rivers. That is what it was all about. Yes, the infrastructure was spectacular, but an infrastructure that came to support the religious life of millions of pilgrims for whom their destination was one and the same, the Sangam. No altar, no temple, simply the meeting rivers. Now, melas are enormously important in the religious life and the cultural life of India. Whether one goes to them or not, one has to admit that not only the Kumbh Mela at Allahabad, but from Haridwar and its Kumbh Mela to Makar Sankranti Mela at Ganga Sagar, where the Ganga meets the sea, these are huge festivals. And far from attenuating in modern times, they seem to be getting bigger all the time. Last summer, the Nasik Kumbh on the Godavari. Next, in a few months' time, the Ujjain Simhasta. Far from diminishing with modernity, Mela pilgrimage has increased in intensity and volume, with more ready access to transportation. At Haridwar here in April 2010, it was estimated that 100,000 people an hour bathed on the great bathing ghats, more than 10 million people over the course of the Mela. And at the same time, the Uttarakhand Environment Conservation and Pollution Control Board registered the coliform levels at the time of the Mela at levels completely unacceptable, even for bathing. Yet the pull of the Ganga, swift flowing, continues to draw people. There's arguably no place in the entire world that should have a higher standard of river quality than India. For there is no other culture in which rivers have such a central role in the ritual culture, the life, the health, and the well-being of countless millions who bathe in the rivers, who sip the waters. For the Melas, there's a great effort to halt upstream industrial pollutants for a time being, to create means of withholding urban wastewater for the time being. But on the whole, how are we doing? The Melas, large as they are, remind us of one critical fact, stressed in the Puranas of old in a kind of different way, that even the tirthas need to be purified, having taken on so many of the impurities and sins of the prayerful faithful who bathe in them. That rivers become impure and burdened with the load of human sin is evident today in a more material and visible way than ever before. Today, this takes on new meanings as the rivers have taken on the collective burden of human neglect. The aftermath of the Kumbh Mela at Allahabad was frightful. And after the Mela in Nasik this summer, the Times of India reported, 2 months since the Godavari was cleaned for the Kumbh Mela in Nashik, the river is a murky nulla, choked with garbage of all sorts, household waste, plastic, puja, remains. And after the Mela in Nasik, the cleanup was slow to come. The Yamuna River, of course, is another story, choked with pollution and its flow so attenuated that there is no opportunity for the river to recover. Water is extracted, untreated waste flows into the river. An official of the Central Pollution Control Board told my colleague David Haberman, the Yamuna is the most polluted river in India, at least the 500-kilometer stretch from Delhi to the Chambai confluence. There is no other river in India carrying this much pollution load. This is in a wonderful book, by the way, by David Haberman called River of Love in an Age of Pollution. It's all about the Yamuna. The head of the board reported in 2007, what is happening to the Yamuna is reflective of what's happened in almost every river in India. The Yamuna is dead. We just haven't officially cremated it. Varanasi, a city I've seen for 50 years, the primary source of pollution is the wastewater and sewage that creeps in from under the ghats. At Asi Ghat in Varanasi, the city that sits between the Varana and the Asi Sangam, there used to be a visible Asi Sangam. This must have been taken about 35 years ago, a small but visible river that today is simply a stream of polluted urban water, unfit for Sangam bathing. Seeping from under the ghats in dozens of places, running through the nullas on the Kacha Ghats of Asi and into the Ganga, are these virtual sewers. And yet here, where these 2 or 3 nullas flow from the sewage of the city into the river, on the ghat itself, people come to bathe, as they did last week at Makar Sankranti. The late Virabhadra Mishra, who launched the Swachha Ganga campaign, saw this as the most critical issue for Varanasi, the flow of untreated sewage into the river at more than a dozen places. And right there at the ghat, bathers continue to take a holy dip. Beautiful, prayerful. The dissonance between the sacredness of India's rivers and the pollution of human and industrial waste is one that's been explored by both scholars and activists. Religious leaders, environmental activists, and political activists have different vocabularies in which to conceptualize the problem that we face. In her research in Varanasi at the Sashwamedh Ghat, right at the heart of the city, thousands of residents and pilgrims come for ritual bathing every day. And Kelly Ali, another one of my colleagues, found that it's hard to deny, for anyone to deny that it's dirty, On Dasashwamedh Ghat, she writes, while pilgrims perform ablutions, others wash clothes with soap, a panda spits, an old woman does latrine on a corner of the ghat for lack of public facilities, and urban sewage flows into the river under the ghat floor. Gandaki surrounds the people seeking purification. But she found, however, that there was considerable resistance among the faithful to speak of the river as not being as not having shuddhata or purity or pavitrata. They can speak of it as dirty, as gandaki, but dirty isn't the same as ashuddhata or apavitra. And this difference of vocabulary seemed to matter. Eulogies to the Ganga, she writes, and worship of Ganga Jal are central symbols in pilgrimage and puja, but they do not describe Ganga Jal as a finite resource whose contours are shaped by a larger ecosystem. She calls her essay Idioms of Degeneracy, and according to scientific and environmental assessments, it's human and industrial waste that's led to the ecological degeneracy. But the residents and religious practitioners at Dasashwamedh of the abuse of the river as a sign of moral degeneracy, of the age, of our age, the inability to create workable sanitation and sewage treatment facilities, the lack of public respect and engagement, the corruption of government officials. These are the issues of degeneracy. Scientists lace their analyses with terms like biological oxygen demand, or BOD, and fecal coliform content account. And some of those who are religious, pilgrims, priests, and others emphasize the competition, the cheating, the wholesale materialism of our time that have led people to disrespect the Ganga. These are both discourses that are unintelligible each to the other. For some, the river crisis is about resource management. For others, it's about the saving power and grace of the river. They see the river through different lenses. They don't trust each other's efforts or goals. They don't have confidence in each other's bureaucracies. Among those who bridge these discourses is the late Virabhadra Mishra, the Mahant and chief priest of Sankat Mochan Temple, as well as a professor of hydrology at BHU. He's lived in his entire life along the Ganga at Tulsi Ghat, the site where the great Tulsidas lived. There's a struggle and turmoil inside my heart, he said. I want to take a holy dip. I need to do it to live. A day does not begin for me without a holy dip, but at the same time, I know what BOD is. I know what it is fecal coliform. And in a widely read interview with Alexander Stilla, published in the New Yorker 18 years ago, his cause, the Swachhaganga campaign, came to public attention. He continued to write and teach, working with water engineers in the US and Europe and India, advanced integrated wastewater pond systems, etc. And while the Ganga Action Plan was launched in 1996, nothing much happened to improve the situation in Varanasi. 5 billion rupees, at least at the start, and nothing much more. We met with Virabhadra Mishra in what might have been one of his last extensive interviews in 2013, as he described his own lifelong struggle as a professor, a scientist, and a man of faith to get an action plan implemented that would stop the pollution of the Ganga. He died just about 2 years ago. Consciousness raising among young people was certainly part of his effort in the Sankat Mochan Foundation and the Swachhaganga campaign, bringing together scientific concerns with religious discourse, respecting Mother Ganga and her purity by not fouling her waters with dirtiness, again making use of the significant conceptual difference between sacral purity and cleanness. The river is sacred. As such, it is considered pure, and is on the basis of that faith and conviction that the filth of untreated sewage and drain water should not be imposed on the body of the mother. It must be halted. As Mishra puts it, the main motivation for environmental work in India is religion. If one hopes to make real progress, one can't simply dissociate an environmental crisis from religious discourse, but the very language of the purity of Mother Ganga must be employed to raise the alarm and raise consciousness. So on January 15th, I was staying at Asighat and walking out amidst the crowds at Makar Sankranti. Their enthusiasm at plunging into the Ganga seemed undiminished, even as the nullas flowed out from the city into the river. There was quite a few trash cans for the first time, so I suspected that Ganga Namami was underway. Save the Ganga at the top of the Ghats, hundreds of women receiving the rice and grain alms, with the wall behind them bearing this urgent message: save Ganges. Well, interestingly, 2 days later, actually the day that we came here to Mumbai, in the morning, I looked out on the same cot at Asi, and what was happening but a very major clean-a-thon. Asighat had a different crowd. Hundreds of uniformed children, school children, mostly in high school, from the Sunbeam schools of the area, participating in a program called the Clean-a-thon, the second annual such event, part of Prime Minister Modi's Ganga Namami, to be sure. I spoke with some of the girls. They had a song to sing that lifted up the message of personal responsibility for the environment, for the river, and for them, for Asighat in particular. They were not about the business of saving the Ganga as a whole, or saving the world as a whole, but doing their part to restore their own corner of the world today, and that corner being Asighat. The boys were there too, in the background, next to the river. They had a long line in which they passed basket to basket of soil that they had dug up, the clay from the riverbank, trying to expose and clean the stairs of the Ghats, passing it hand to hand, one basket to another, one boy to another, until they poured it onto one of those seeping nullas that ran into the edge of Asighat. Really a touching gesture that will be swept away, actually, with the first of the monsoon, a kind of Band-Aid, but not a Band-Aid in the sense that, that it really was an act of commitment. And along the Ghats as well, there were young artists like this boy who had set up their easels and were painting slogans and pictures. This one, a pencil sketch of a man, of a boy, someone lifting up a basket of dirt from the Ghats. And of course, NDTV was there as well with their long booms, making sure that we could document this so that other people could have the contagion of this hope. And I think that's what it is, a kind of contagious hope that is not about major policies, which really need changing, but is about young people's attitudes. And of course, supervising all of it on a billboard was Amitabh Bachchan, who is apparently the patron of this. But another billboard nearby told the story of change at Asighat. That in 2014, it took 12,530 hours of man days, 15,520 hours of machine days, 156 workers, hundreds of students from Sunbeam doing Kar Seva, 34,000 tractor loads of silt and solid wastes removed, 56 steps and 7 platforms excavated, and actually it's made a difference in Asighat. We'll see if anything more permanent than the annual cleaning can make a difference. And certainly, the dilapidated old Ganga Action Plan UP pollution control boats will have perhaps a little more energy if we are to participate in the hope of these days. Then Swami Chidanand Saraswati, another of these people who has taken on the green Ganga, make your Ganga green and clean, large encampment at the Kumbh Mela, of both Indian and international followers, and a wide campaign to make the 2013 Kumbh Mela a green Kumbh Mela, with pointers to pilgrims to reuse plastic bottles and refuse any kind of polythene bags, not to leave puja items in the water, etc. Do's and don'ts for a green Kumbh Mela. Here he's emerging from a tent where there was a very large gathering of mayors from up and down the cities of the Ganga, about 5 major city mayors, a symposium to address the issues of urban discharge into the Ganga, 2.9 billion liters of sewage daily, 80% of urban waste into these same rivers. And certainly, mayors and municipalities have to be deeply involved along with state and national governments. And of course, at this same encampment, as all the mayors gathered, the sins of the earth were represented on this interesting sort of person. Water wasting, plastic littering, poisoning the water, poisoning pesticides, corruption is added, abused women, cow slaughter, meat eating, and plastic burning, etc. And along with this, a woman representing Ganga herself, highlighting in her garb the river pollution at Swami Chidanand Saraswati's camp. The blue veil of the Ganga attached with all sorts of wrappers and plastics and bits of refuge. And the seemingly small matter, but critical one in the context of pilgrimage to the Mela, the mountain of flowers, the marigolds harvested, transported, sold, just one mala here or there, perhaps just one little deepa of candle and marigold, sold by the river's edge, perhaps just one flower, but 70 million marigolds in a river over the course of time become another form of choking and pollution. So this too was addressed, and there were people, young boys like this, whose task every day was to stand on the sandbanked ghats of the Kumbh Mela at Prayag and to scoop them out of the river. A seemingly hopeless task, but a gesture nonetheless, and one in which we participated as well with the Ganga Action Parivar and Pujya Swamiji Chidanand Saraswati. I am actually helping him there scoop up marigolds and put them in a big pile to be hauled away. If Ganga dies, Swami Chidananda puts it, India dies. If Ganga thrives, India thrives. In violating Ganga, we are violating basic human rights and are putting at risk the bright futures of our children that they so greatly deserve. Now is the time for action, so let us all stand together for Ganga rights. And the idea of putting together something called the Rights of the River, RIGHT, is something perhaps new. Mother Ganga, they put it, is polluted by nearly 3 billion liters of sewage and chemical waste every day. Her rights are being violated, and in turn, our rights to clean water are being violated. People are getting sick, children are dying. It's time we say no more. Ganga has the right to flow in her clean, pristine form. Ganga's rights are our rights, so they say. The dissonance between the unique significance of India's sacred rivers and the awful reality of rivers streaming with pollution poses a dilemma for India that cannot be understood or solved without resort to sophisticated religious as well as scientific understanding. The best of the sciences, the best of the engineers, and the best of the humanities. It will surely require the best efforts of technology experts, environmentally committed activists, religious leadership to solve this problem. There seems to be all too little dialogue between them, and yet maybe we are standing at a new era of hope. The Ganga, said Jawaharlal Nehru, especially is the river of India. Now, I mean, mind you, he was very, a secular man, avowedly. And this still, in his last will and testament, words that most of us are familiar with. The Ganga especially is the river of India, beloved of her people, round which are intertwined her memories, her hopes and fears, her songs of triumph, her victories and her defeats. She has become a symbol of India's age-long culture and civilization, ever-changing, ever-flowing, and yet ever the same, Ganga. So I want to close with something with which Cyrus began, and that is a little bit of the Ganga Lahari by the poet Jagannatha, 17th century, who lived during the time of Shah Jahan. He was rejected by the Brahmins of Kashi for his marriage to a Muslim woman. Tormented about his rejection, he sat with his beloved, so they say, on the steps of Panchganga Ghat, the long ghat, where formerly the Bindu Madhava temple stood. And he began chanting, creating, reciting this poem, which was to be his last composition. And with each verse, the Ganga rose up by one step to touch him, and finally embraced the two of them and carried them away. Samriddhim saubhagyam sakala vasudhaya kimapitan Mahaishvaryam Leela Janata Jagata Kanda Parasho Shrutinam Sarvasvam Sukritamathamurtam Sumanasam Sudhasandaryam Te Salilama Shivam Na Shamayatu. May your waters, inexpressible treasure of good fortune for the world, which possess the purity of nectar, the essence of the scriptures, the embodied goodness of the gods. May your waters, divine wine of immortality, soothe our troubled souls. Thank you.
Mami, will you come up and thank, and then we'll just present the plaque to Diana Eck and a gift to Cyrus Gazdar, after which we can do some questions. But I'd like Diana to sit down at that point. Can you bring a chair for Diana? Yeah, just bring it up.
You want me to sit? Okay. I think so. But when your mother is standing, I can stand, of course.
I'm totally speechless. Diana, Dorothy, trustees of the museum, trustees of the foundation, Howard Hodgkin, and all our dear friends who come every year, and we feel very, very happy about it. Now, I'm going to say something very simple and very short. This is personal. I come from this land, and when I read, and I as a child, I went to all these places, we went to bathing in Ganges temple, but somehow after I read Kashi, City of Light, the whole thing became alive, as if this has come up from the dark And it was such a beautiful experience, Diana, that I decided that I must invite this lady one day. And it's my daughter, Ketaki, and friend Rahul, who have helped her to come here. And this is really my dream come true. That's all I wish to say. And I'm very, very thankful to you. I'm extremely privileged that you are here with us. All I can say is the young people are the future of the country, the young engineers, because it is so hopeless a job, so difficult, but it has to be done. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Now, we're going over here.
Cyrus, please come.
I don't want to say that it's quite a unique presence. It's a very unique presence.
Thank you, Cyrus.
If there are any pertinent questions, you may please ask, but I think we're all speechless. Well, there she is.
The first question has come. Mommy, why don't you sit? No. So Dan, why don't you sit?
Yes, but Mommy should sit
That's the first question that's come.
Well, this is a very interesting question. Why Muslim masters did not change names of rivers? Well, let's put it this way. There weren't very many of them compared to the multitudes of people. It's very hard to change names of rivers. These are names that are given by popular acclamation. I think if anyone had tried to change the name of Ganga, it would have been very difficult. They did manage to change the name of Allahabad, at least in the short term. I mean, it's still known very much as Prayag by others. On the other hand, some of them, like Akbar, who apparently had his fort at Allahabad, was a great devotee of the Ganga. He used to have Ganga Jal delivered to his court for his own personal drinking. Is there another question?
Yes, I want to ask one. Your lecture was very elaborative, and of course the life of rivers, I mean the physical life of rivers and the geography and everything you talked about, but one aspect is left, and that is why we are not caring about our rivers, their health. One aspect is that we were invaded. Our temples along the rivers were looted, destroyed, because we have also traveled across India to many places, and this is what we have seen. So you can imagine a generation is standing in a temple and it is looted, destroyed. What kind of mental trauma the whole generation and generation after generation will feel, and they would just run away. I mean, they will not, they would be so scared to even come and bathe for some time. So this aspect is not taken in your lecture, so I just want to know what is it?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting question, because there certainly are many temples that were looted and destroyed. I speak from some experience in Benares, though, that it did not leave the city fazed. I mean, the temple of Vishwanath was destroyed many times, always replaced hither and yon, because how does one destroy the symbolic manifestation of Shiva? It's very hard. And a lot of the great temples, like Omkareshwara, for example, along the Narmada, these are places that were sanctified by the footsteps of pilgrims and not by the patronage of kings. So the main thing about many of the temple destructions is that they had a political edge to them, in the sense that they had to do with the control of particular territories. And most of the great temples, the real tirthas of India, they simply couldn't be destroyed. And they were not of any consequence to anyone other than the people who flocked to them on pilgrimage. And I think Omkareshwar is a very good example of this.
Diane, good evening. Wonderful to meet you again. You wouldn't remember, you were traveling with the Harvard Alumni Association group. You were on the Bengal Ganga.
Yes.
You were traveling with Prakash, and I was getting on that with a Yale alumni group. This was some years ago in Varanasi, and I met you very briefly. But there was a very interesting thing. I was recently traveling with the Stanford Alumni Association group, and we met Professor Vishambar Nath Mishra. And it was very interesting what he was disclosing about what was being done with the Ganga. And he said before our current Prime Minister was elected, he gave him 20-minute audience, and he heard the entire presentation about cleaning up the Ganga. And he said, but once he came into power, now what is happening is only the sweeping and the cleaning is happening. And unfortunately, nothing is being done about stopping the sewage from coming into the river. Absolutely nothing at all. But one thing that I find extremely apathetic about people who approach the river is that, you know, people bring these flowers in a plastic bag.
Yes,
they use the flowers, and then they just wrap the plastic bag and just throw it into the river a little further away. A little further away. I mean, it's just that sense. And this is not a question, but it's more of a comment that you can perhaps add on to, is that we're the ones who are making the river dirty, and when are we going to wake up and clean up our own river by cleaning our act?
Well, I mean, it really is true. I think we can't rest with the symbolism of sweeping and of, you know, doing the cleaning. And the garbage cans I'm really happy to see, but, you know, it's not just a superficial thing. So the one thing that I found to be hopeful, well, and I don't know, that you have greater experience with this than I, is that the Prime Minister has also called the IITs to come together. So we have some technological expertise, perhaps, to put their minds to this. Perhaps, you know, we can't have a program that is designed by too much of a committee of IITs, but there really does absolutely need to be technological intervention. It will take time. It will take disruption. It will take billions and billions of rupees, and it will take a change in consciousness. So I'm hopeful where there's a change in consciousness. That's why I'm hopeful for, you know, all of these children's programs and whatnot. But you're right, it needs much, much more. I will say one other thing about the Vikramashila sort of preserve where the dolphins were supposed to be kept. In the last 2 times I've been on the river, we have seen quite a few dolphins. Now, quite a few doesn't mean that there are lots of them there, but they are visible to someone who is a casual traveler, and you see them, you know, leaping out of the river. Is it? Should we have one more, huh? Is there one more?
Yeah.
Yes.
Ma'am, you've given a wonderful in-depth understanding of our rivers. And I think it was very enlightening and at the same time very encouraging for many Indians who really don't think, as he has just put it, as to what we are doing with our rivers. One aspect which I would like to also look at in the present contemporary times, besides the pollutants, besides the garbage, besides the garlands, the flowers, plastics, everything that we are dumping into our rivers, for which we as ordinary citizens will never be answerable or will never be able to approach the problem, is sand lifting. I have been working on the city of Kannauj, which is a very ancient city, which is on the Ganga, and it is on the right bank of the Ganga. The Ganga is moving away from the city. It has moved nearly 5 kilometers away from the city. The city was raided at the time of the Muslim invasions. But the fears now are of sand lifting, and I have covered it myself, how the government itself is responsible for this sand lifting. And when I was recording at those dumps where the sand has been lifted and dumped, I was moving in a moving car. I was covering it. And then too somebody saw me, and there were fears that we are going to be chased and our cameras are going to be pulled out. The amount of sand that has been picked up, and at the same time, the government is putting up proposals of an expressway connecting Lucknow to Agra, wherein Kannauj is going to be cut off from the city of Ganga. And the reasons they give is, I mean, we as individuals, as ordinary citizens, have no say in it. And the reasons they say is flooding, as you very rightly said it, that flooding brings in a lot of alluvial soil, makes the plains very, very fertile. And the reason they give is that we are going to protect our land from this flooding. So we do not understand as to what is going to happen in the future times to come if this expressway, which links Lucknow to Agra and takes you across in 3.5 hours to Delhi. So the fears of a city of Kannauj dying, because no archaeological excavations have been done there for various reasons since 1954. So the city is lying since Harshvardhan's time, even before that, the city is lying buried, not knowing what is happening, and these fears are looming large. So this is a very important aspect of sand lifting. I mean, we normally talk about it, but when I have seen it so closely happening, the fears, they multiply in my thought process as I hear you talking about
Thank you for that intervention as well, because I do remember, I mean, many people have talked about the fact that this is illegal to, dig up sand and take it away, which they do. And this is noted several times as we're traveling along. And the fact that the river recedes from the banks of, the river is fairly uncontrollable in some ways, and that it recedes from cities is a difficult thing. It has receded enormously. The river that used to run through Gaya, for example, is no river there at all anymore, and Kannauj as well. Thank you for that.